So I hope that you recognize this was just a fraction function called rational function that had been moved 3 to the left. If you reflect on yours, does yours have an asymptote that's kind of 3 to the left of 0? Let's talk about why that would be. That's the vertical asymptote, x equals, and it's whatever makes the bottom 0. What makes that 0 is -3. That's why it's shifted to the left 3. Then the horizontal asymptote, I recommend that you think of that as the 1,000 trick. You put 1,000 in here, and then you have 1 over about 1,000, which is about nothing. If I give you 1/1000th of a dollar, it's like literally round to 0. So you have y equals 0, so there's an asymptote here. And then there is no hole. Holes are what happens if you get like this over this. And when that happens, then that cancels and creates a hole at -4. But we don't have that, so there is none for holes. Next, if you just tell me a couple spots, like if you could tell me it goes here and here, then I'm going to know to like draw the lines closer and closer, never touching the asymptotes. I actually touched it there. I want to like literally stop, back up, because no, you're not supposed to touch the asymptotes. Okay, and then same thing here, but I need to know a couple points. Where do you get them? From your XY chart. So you go and say, if I know that putting in -3 makes the asymptote, what do you mean? If I go put the -3 here, and I put a -3 right there, it'll be 1 over 0, which doesn't exist. Hence, that's the asymptote. Then you put a number right in front of it and right after it, and you see what you get. And if I put in a -2 right here, I hope you realized how nice it worked out. It comes out to 1 over 1, which is 1. And the other one, when you put in a -4 right here, you get -1 on the bottom, so you have 1 over -1, which is -1. -4, -1, and that's what these spots are. That right there is -4, -1. And this spot right here was -2, comma 1. And then you just have to know to draw your line getting closer and closer. Now, if you want to go find 20 more points, guess where they'll be? Right along here. If you want to find a bunch more points, they'll be like in here. But you don't need to. You just need a couple points and you can draw the lines. Let me make sure you understand what I mean. If I know there's asymptotes here, and there's a point here and here, then I can just draw the lines through them. Do you get how quick that is? You just need a couple points in the asymptotes and you can graph these things. Super easy. Now later on this week, we'll start throwing in like, oh, and there's a hole at 1. Well, over 1, up 1, and there's an empty spot there? Okay, fine. It's not that bad to fix their graph and just put in an empty spot where there's a hole. Okay, now you haven't done that yet. The other thing is this one's like backwards. Aren't they normally here, Mr. Server? Yes, they are normally there, but what if you put a negative in the problem? It flips it, and they'll be where the red ones are. That's like what we do for the rest of the week, because we talk more about holes, we talk more about what if the graph flips or stretches, and it always keeps coming back to their rational functions. This is a new kind, 1 over x squared. I call it the volcano. You can memorize it if you want. Can you remove these? Thank you. You can set that on my desk. You can remove, hold on. Sorry, I got distracted with 2 different kids. So I've got this, and I've got this, and then how did it turn into this? Well, this one's still in the same spot, but this one flipped up, and it's now here. Why? Because when you square something, even the negative numbers turn positive. So do you get if you put negative numbers in, it'll act like you're putting in positive numbers, so you'll get positive answers every time because you're squaring it. That's why it moves up. If you can care about why, that's why it looks like that. But otherwise, I could just find a bunch of points. I would like to practice that, because if there was only one skill that I could bless you with for this next test, it would be able to take something like that and make me like 5 points. So everybody, put in 0, and I know it makes a weird thing. It makes the asymptote. Then put in something on either side of it. Like what's on either side of 0? Well, 1 or -1. Go ahead and put in those. And then put in a couple more points. Like what else could you put in besides -1 and 1? You could put in 2. You could put in -2. You could. So find me a few points. So critical. W squared in the black jacket. Would you please tell me, Winston, what do you have when you put in -1? Square it. 1 over that. So I gave you x is -1, and we figured out that y is what? 1. It came out to 1. All right. -2. Everybody put in -2. See what you get. -2 squared is 4, and you get 1/4. Who had 1/4 before I said it? Thank you. These are supposed to be easy, but I'm telling you, it's the most important thing for your next test is making this XY chart. The rest of it, horizontals and verticals, pretty much every kid gets the horizontals and verticals right. That's not hard. What's hard is making these points. Now I'm going to put in +1. And I put in a +1. And 1 squared is 1, and 1 over 1 is 1. And then I'm going to put in 2. 2 squared is 4. 1 over 4 is 1/4. Now just recognize that all of these spots are on your graph. Like they're there somewhere. Like -1, 1. That's right there. -2, 1/4. That's right there. 0 is the asymptote. Which kind of asymptote? The kind where x equals 0, which is the vertical asymptote. And then 1, 1. That's right there. 2, 1/4. Over 2 up 1/4. It's right there. It all makes sense to me anyway. Okay, what about the horizontal asymptote? I've tried to give you a dumb way to remember that. Your horizontal asymptote, y equals 0. Where do we get those again? From the 1,000 trick. If you put in 1,000 here, you get 1 over a million. 1,000 times 1,000 is a million. 1/1,000,000th of something is 0. It's pretty much 0. That's why it's at 0. Okay, there's a good review. Now go on and we're going to find this one. Oh my gosh, it's even easier. Without even doing all the work, just graph this. Just go right to the graph. Remember how if I said if you could bless you with only one thing, it would be to know how to do these? Just find a few points and graph it. It'll be easy. Now I will say, if you figure out the horizontal and the vertical, it actually helps a lot. Just the dots, it's kind of really good to have like the fence posts put up. Horizontals are y equals things, verticals are x equals things. Hope you figured out it was 0 and 0. And if you put in 1, you get 1. Put in 2, you get 1/2. -1, you get -1. -2, you get -1/2. And if I graph those, 1, 1. -1, -1. That's all I really needed. I don't need more points. because of how I know asymptotes work, it has to go this way, and this way and that way. But Mr. Server, why isn't it here? It would be there if we flipped it. How would we flip it? You mean like flipped up and down? Yep, like flipped up and down. You'd put a negative in the problem, and if there was a negative right here, the whole thing would flip. That's how you'd flip it. We're not even going to do that today, but that's how you would. Okay, go to the next page. 1 over x squared. I hope these become like second nature. Horizontal, 1,000 trick. Vertical, makes the bottom 0. No holes because nothing cancels. Make the graph of this really quick. You'll need an XY chart. If nothing else, because we make you. If you don't name at least 2 clean points on your graph, then all you did was a sketch. Like I can sketch it in 2 seconds. Okay, I think it's like this. But then I wasn't accurate at all. You gotta have a few accurate points. And the asymptotes. That's how we grade them. The x asymptote, which is the vertical asymptote, and the y one, which is the horizontal asymptote, and then just a few points. All right, Dice of Destiny. Who's going to tell me something? You got to tell me the vertical or the horizontal or a point or something. Benning, it's you.
I think the horizontal asymptote is 0.
You are correct. Is that an x equals or a y equals 0?
Y equals 0.
Y equals 0. Horizontal asymptote. Good. Next up. Ava, this is you.
Vertical asymptote is...
What letter is it always?
Oh, x equals.
X equals. And then what makes this thing 0 on the bottom?
0.
Yep. So our horizontals and our verticals are pretty normal. But now we have to find a couple points. Nate, give me a point. You put in a 1, and you get y equals 1 over 1, which is 1. I agree, 1 is on there. And Claudia, give me another point.
-2, 1/2.
-2. Isn't -2 squared going to be 4? So -2, when you put it in, gives you what final answer? 1/4. Okay. Now, -2, 1/4 is like there-ish. And that's all I need. Do you need more? I don't, because I know it goes closer and closer to the asymptote here and there and here and there. Good enough. Yes.
Why would it be negative?
I just screwed up the graphing of it. You are correct. Let's graph it again. It's -2 comma 1/4, and I put -2 -1/4. Ooh. -2 comma 1/4 is above the line. Thank you for catching that. It's like there, so then it goes up. You can still screw up the graphs, that's for sure. I went down instead of up. I was thinking this was negative, it's not. Okay, so there's my final graph. I feel like this is really easy. I think you can do this with no problems. I could be deceiving myself though. Like I can't tell if you guys really get this, but I'd love for you to just do this, not this one, actually the next page, this one. Figure out the horizontal. 1,000 trick. It's trickier this time because you got to remember it's got a -3 at the end. So you do your 1,000 trick, figure out what that's equal, and then you subtract 3. Your verticals are the things that make the bottom 0. You got to remember if they're x's or y's. Then you sketch it, and you got to have some xy points. This is on page 7 of the notes. I'm going to pause for a second while you give this one a shot. Turf, tell me something he's figured out early on.
It goes left 2.
All right. are you, okay, are you on, look up on the board here. Are you sure you are doing the same one as me? I think you're doing a different one. Okay, so I'll come back to you. This is on page 7. I think you're doing the one that's before that. All right. So Noah, can you tell me something you did earlier on here? And did you do this one with the x squared in it?
No.
You weren't doing this one either? You guys might not have noticed that I went to page 7. Did I? I think I told everybody that, but... Okay, so who did the one with the x squared in it? Raise your hand if you did this one. Did everybody, or like half of you, or... Okay, I think I confused some of you, so I guess I will do some work for this one myself. The horizontals are the things with the 1,000 trick. So I'm going to put in the 1,000 here. And 1 over 1,000,000 is pretty much 0. But then you subtract 3. So you're at 0 minus 3. So you're at, horizontals are y equals -3. Then the verticals. The verticals are x equals things. And so I go x equals, and the verticals are what makes the bottom 0. What would make that 0? If x equaled 0. So there's my asymptotes. Vertical is the zertical is this one. The y equals 3 is, or -3 is this one. And now if you just tell me a couple points, you can graph the rest of it pretty easy. So you make your XY chart here. Jack Sexton, can you tell me a point that you found?
-1, 1.
Okay, -1, when I put it right here, becomes 1 over 1 is 1. 1 minus 3. Aha. Now, you remember me saying that that's the most important thing is these points over here, and that if I could bless you with only one skill, it would be getting those right? Because people get the asymptotes right, and then they get these points wrong. Okay, Nate, can you tell me another thing we could put in besides -1?
1.
All right, so walk me through it. If I put in 1,
1 squared is 1, so that's 1 over 1, which is 1 minus 3 is negative.
1 minus 3, -2. So we put in a 1, we got -2. All right, let's put that on my desk again. So -1, -2. It's right there. 1 comma -2 is right there. And if you know what the graph looks like, it'll be really obvious. Like, so it makes sense. It's like a volcano. That's what these are supposed to look like. It's just been shifted down. And doesn't this look like it's just a 1 over x squared, which is the volcano, but shifted down? Doesn't that make sense? Okay. This one. Asymptotes. 1,000 trick. X equals something that makes the function not exist. And then find me just a couple points on the XY chart. I'm going to pause for a second and give that a try. Okay, let's just make sure you're on the right track. The horizontals, that's the y equals things, the horizontals. And how do you get those again? Jaden, how do you get the horizontals? 1,000 things. So if we put in 1,000 here, what's this pretty much? 0 plus 1. Final answer? Y equals 1. Cool. All right, the verticals. Tate, that's you. How do you do the verticals again? Yes, what does?
4.
Excellent. So I put in 4, but then I get it wrong. What was it supposed to be? There we go. X equals 4. Good. So now that's a vertical. That means up and down at 4. And the other one's at 1. The horizontal asymptote's at 1. And then if I only had a couple points, like seriously, if I just knew it was here and here, I could just like fill in my little, you know, my little lines that go through those points and they have to get closer and closer to asymptotes. So I just don't need tons of points, but I need a couple. Claudia, tell me a point by sticking in a number.
Well, if you
Put in one,
so negative 1/3.
negative 1/3 plus 1. What's that? Positive 2/3. Good. Now, that is not the point I would have picked, but it's right. Let me just show you what I would have picked. I would have said to myself, what made the asymptote? So I go, I'm going to put in something that makes it have an asymptote. Oh, yeah, 4. If you pick 4 for your first point, then pick stuff around 4, like 3 and 5. You get nice points that aren't decimals. Now this isn't, so your point wasn't wrong, but 1 comma 2/3 is just kind of weird to graph. It'd be like there-ish. Okay. So I'm going to instead go 4 gives me the asymptote. So then I'm going to ask for 3. Did anybody put in 3? That was wise. Spencer, what'd you get when you put in 3? You are correct, because I get negative 1. 1 over negative 1 is negative 1 plus 1 is 0. So 3 comma 0. That's right there. That's a perfect point, 3 comma 0. And then you put in 5. 5 minus 4 is 1. 1 over 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 5 comma 2 over 5 up 2. Look at that. Now those are perfect points. They don't even have decimals. Get closer and closer to the asymptotes, never touch them. There you go. So how does it get harder on Tuesday and Wednesday? We might have a hole thrown in. Like there's an empty spot right there. And how would that ever happen? If we had like an x minus 3 and an x minus 3 on the top and the bottom, and then they cancel, that would make a hole. Then the other thing we can do that makes them complicated is we could flip the whole thing. Like make this side go over here and that side go over there. And it'd be like this green one then. When would that ever happen? If we throw a negative in the problem? Do you get throwing in a negative in the problem? Usually does a reflection, it's called. If I multiply by negative 1, my points would all change, and it would make this thing move. That's a big overview of the next several days. Tomorrow and the next day gets a little more complicated with the negatives and the holes, and then Thursday's a review, and then Friday's a test. All right. So let's get started on the worksheet. We'll do number 1 together. Once you find the worksheet, cross off the very last one, because I'm committed to trying to keep your life doable. Get a little pre-calc done tonight, but not so much that it drives you crazy. All right. Number 1 is pretty easy, Nate. Do I remember it right as 1 over x? Is that correct? The first question? All right. So everybody find the vertical and the horizontal. Horizontal is the 1,000 trick. Vertical is what makes the bottom 0. See if I can call on the rest of the people I haven't talked to yet. Bridger, what did you get for the horizontal for this one? Y equals 0. And that's the 1,000 trick. You put 1,000 here and it's like 1 over 1,000 and that's pretty much 0. All right. Lux, how do you find the vertical asymptote for this thing?
Vertical asymptote is whatever is x equals whatever makes the denominator 0.
Correct. In this case?
X equals 0.
Good. And then you graph the thing and you go dotted lines for horizontal and vertical. And then I just need a couple points. Hal, tell me a point. XY chart. Okay, put in 1, and I get y equals 1 and 1. Nice. And then if I put in negative 1, I would get negative 1. That's down here. And once you have those points, you can just get closer and closer to the asymptotes, but try not to touch them. One thing I didn't do this time that I think is smart is I should put 0 as the asymptote right in the chart And then that reminds you, do something on either side of 0, you know? Like if 0 is the asymptote, that tells you to use 1 and -1. All right. Now, they're just gonna get a little more complicated with some squareds and stuff. Just the key will really be finding clean, good points. So on number 2, hey Ava, would you read me number 2? Y equals,
1/x².
all right. Then the horizontals and the verticals aren't even that important because it's all the same as what we did. What's gonna be super important is the XY chart. Ainsley, I said try to find the thing that makes the asymptote. What X would make our asymptote? 0, so I put 0 as the asymptote. And then Claudia, I said to go on either side of that, so 1 and, good. And if you find those 2 points, it'll be much easier to graph this thing. Horizontals are Y equals things, verticals are X equals things. If you get stuck, please come up and ask. And that's all I got for you for today.